The first noise is not the roar, but the breath. A city, holding it. A winter night in the Syrian northwest, sits on the edges of cots and cracked teacups, on concrete roofs that remember other explosions. Then the ground inhales, and exhalation comes as violence. Walls shudder like startled animals. Steel rebars vibrate. A scream of masonry. Floors tilt. A staircase folds on itself. Dust erupts where air should be. Somewhere in Jindir's, a mother counts the heartbeats of her 2 sleeping children and realizes she is holding the wrong pillow. She reaches, and the house gives way. In the dark, a boy's voice threads through rubble. Here, here. Cell phones light like fireflies, pinched between knuckles, cutting cones through air so thick it gums the mouth. There's a rhythm to panic shout. Listen, Claw. Listen, that turns strangers into a single animal. The white helmets arrive not as saviors, but as more hands, breathing through debris, lifting, cursing, praying under their breath, listening for the faint thudding that signals knuckles against a buried beam. Hundreds of kilometers away, a night shift radio operator in Gaziantep flicks through channels as incoming messages stack like plates. Epicenter near car. Roads split. Bridges down. Aftershocks. The northwest in Syria reports building collapses by the dozen. Cross-border access unclear. The Bab al-Hawa crossing sits in the dark behind its lowered gate. Floodlights off because the electricity failed in the quake. Quietly, a coordinator populates a spreadsheet with words that should never be banal. Search and rescue. Trauma kits. Diesel. Body bags. The screen's glow reflects in her glasses as another aftershock ripples the building. The water cooler wobbling with a soft cluck. Across an ocean and a sea. In the Bay of Bengal. A pinwheel of cloud. Precise and indifferent. Tightened over warm water. Cyclomocha gathers itself with the slow arrogance of a force that knows it will own the horizon soon. On a village path outside Sitfu, Myanmar tarpaulins slap in the wind as men lash ropes around bamboo posts. The sea carries the smell of salt and diesel. They said it will pass, an old man murmurs. Half to the young woman beside him, half to the radio announcing words that mean less than they should in a place where warnings arrive as rumor. They said that before. He remembers the shoals after Nargis, the bodies caught in mangroves. She remembers the morning soldiers took her cousin. How water can terrify like men do. In Yemen, where rain has returned with unfamiliar frequency, the cholera ward in Hadida drips with both water and time. Buckets catch leaks from a corrugated ceiling. A little girl sleeps under a buzzing blue light, her lips flat and pale. And 4-bag empties with the steady blink of a monitor powered by a generator that needs fuel they can no longer promise. A nurse with her hair tucked under a scarf checks the drip, strokes the child's hair, and counts under her breath because the clock on the wall stopped last month. Outside, a tanker truck idles, the driver arguing with a man in a faded vest about the price of chlorine. The river rose last week and took with it the latrines in the IDP camp. The water in the canal is a sky-colored poison. The nurse can smell it on shoes when the families walk in. What ties these places together tonight is not map or language, but a law as simple and cruel as gravity. When the ground moves or the wind comes, front lines due to earthquake, cyclone, epidemics. Demands speed from places built for slowness. Paved roads replaced by checkpoints. Hospitals turned to targets. Borders as fragile as a promise. Aid agencies will call through their storied well-preparedness plans and contingency annexes. And someone will use the word deconfliction, as if the syllables could remove a landmine from a curve in the road. It is both necessary and absurd. Wind snap wires somewhere in Rakhine. Water tumbles in ditches around Tays. The first cold light slips over Rehunk. As a convoy idles in a lot, engines murmuring like animals, ready to run. Drivers stand with hands in pockets, each of them watching the gate that separates them from a valley of pancaked concrete and buried wrists. A message pings on the coordinator's phone. Negotiating additional crossing points. Pending consent. Stand by. In Sito, a young Rohingya man ties a second knot and looks at the swollen river. The mosque loudspeaker crackles with a prayer that sounds like a plea. In Hadida, The generator coughs. The boy's voice beneath the slab thins. Threads of sound fading, then strengthening. A metronome for strangers. A rescuer pushes his hand deeper into a cavity that doesn't exist on any blueprint. His fingers brush hair. He closes his eyes to focus, and feels, rather than sees, the world narrowing to skin and dust. Overhead. Another aftershock shivers the night as the radios flare with a word everyone has been waiting for and dreading in equal measure. Permission. Engines rev. The gate lifts 2 feet. Wind hits the first corrugated roofs in Sitwa, with a slap like a palm. The nurse in Hodeida looks up at the ceiling as the generator stutters and drops to a low, apprehensive hum, and the IV's drip becomes an accusation measured in seconds. The rescuer breathes into his dust mask and says, "Hold," to a child who cannot see him. While, beyond the floodlights, the line of trucks leans forward in the dark and waits for an opening that may already be closing. The first truck lurches, snarls, and crawls toward Baba Lahawa. Headlights drilling tunnels through dust, shaken loose by the quake. Drivers keep their eyes on the tailgate of the truck ahead, a caravan pulled by patience and duty. They will not cross tonight. Negotiations have unfurled like paper maps on desks that have felt too many elbows. The old authorization expired. The new has not yet learned its name. In the space between those two facts, concrete waits on lungs. In Jindayas and Afrin, men, women, and children form bucket brigades of broken plaster and pass out backward, grief forward. A white helmet's volunteer named Salim, who used to fix car radios, tends his bloodied palms upward, then back to the rubble with a flat, elemental persistence. He speaks into his headset to an operator with a map pinned by coffin nails. "We need Jack. We need time." His voice breaks on the last word. A request to physics. An hour later, the radios crackle with a new phrase. Temporary crossings authorized at Bab al-Salam al-Rai. The words, taste provisional, in the mouth. The routes to them are cracked and burdened with scenes that are both beyond and intimately familiar families lined along median. The kitchen table salvaged and set at the roadside. A tiny boy in a red sweater, pointing stubbornly at a toy taxi, half swallowed by concrete. On a hill, a dead tree stands, its roots red-threaded like arteries splayed open. The smell is of dust and diesel and the sharp iron tang of blood you don't see. In situ, the trees are not dead yet, but they bend like old men. Cyclone Mocha Si still curls the sea beyond the horizon, but the wind that arrives ahead of it gallops down alleys and climbs over shacks. Testing, Rohingya camps, a maze of narrow lanes and green tarps, hum with preparation. Sandbags stacked, windows crossed with tape, water jugs filled from wells that teeter on the edge of salt. Aid workers text one another coordinates of storm shelters while tracking phone reception like a bird's tracks in sand. "If we lose contact, we meet at the school," one writes. If the school goes, the monastery. The irony sits unspoken. The places that house different prayers have so often been the only ones that keep all bodies safe. When politics cannot, but politics will enter even the wind. In village offices, officials stamp travel papers that are valid only during daylight. Permissions for Rakhine state arrive with asterisks. Convoys need escorts. Rohingya movement is restricted. Curfews will resume even if roofs blow off. The field coordinator drives past a checkpoint where the soldiers' uniforms look brand new, and wonders how many hours the road will be open after the trees start falling. She catches herself counting fuel drums in her head, doing math with decimals and guesswork. Yemen breathes in the scent of rain that never cared for ceasefires. In an IDP camp near Marib, tent rows sag with water and old weight. Children skip between puddles that are not clean enough to be joy. The warn sign on the cholera treatment center creaks. Nurses raise cots onto blocks to keep them above the creeping water. The oxygen concentrator rattles, protesting the power surges from a generator running on fumes. In a small storeroom, a young logistician named Hani runs a finger down a ledger list. Oral rehydration solution. 4 sets. Zinc syrup, chlorine underlined. Circled. A star beside it. as if emphasis could conjure a delivery truck through a checkpoint. He texts the NGO's Sana office. Any word on the convoy from Hadi? He sees the dots as someone types, deletes, types again, delayed, negotiating, send updates. When Mocha's outer bands cross the coast, Sitwa's tin roofs flex like muscle and then dislocate. Rain falls as if it were failing at being water and wanted to be nails instead. The sound is animal. Floodwater surges down lanes that are narrower than any boat. Families wade with children on shoulders. Ankles cutting, brown swirls, feet searching for sudden holes. The plank bridge over the canal lifts and floats away like it was never attached to anything at all. In a monastery, monks carry boxers of rice up the stairs as a wall peels its paint in long strips. In northwest Syria, aftershocks continue to interrupt sentences. A forklift breaks down. The operator sits, one hand on the wheel, forehead against the other, the machine squealing like a thing in pain. A daughter holds a phone to her father's ear, playing him a voice message from his sister in Antioquia. Living voice, to pull him from the house where he keeps sitting on a chair that is now only 3 legs in memory. A van pulls up with volunteers from a town 2 hours away where buildings also fell. But less. They bring sandwiches wrapped in newspaper and a crowbar with a wrapped handle that feels like a friend. Night in Yemen is frequently loud, but tonight, it's loud with water. City streets in Sana have become shallow, moving mirrors. In Hudaida, floodwater hides broken glass, barbed wire, and the sharp, random edges of a long war. In the cholera ward, the nurse steps carefully, lifting the 4 tubing-like vine, checking each child, each set of eyes that turn and hold on to hers, as if she were a tree in a river. She can smell the chlorine before she can see the man lugging the canisters through the door. Relief skim-coats her voice as she calls to Hani, who is already reaching for the ledger, already subtracting from the margin what they can afford to use tonight, and what they have to pretend will arrive tomorrow. We tend to imagine disaster as an event like a sentence. Subject, verb, period. But war scatters the punctuation. After the quake, the roads are not just cracked, they are mapped by whoever's holding the hill outside town. After the cyclone, the debris is not just debris, it is proof of who is allowed to build with brick and who with tarp. And when disease walks in water, it meets hunger at the tent flap. And together they make a life too thin to repair and too stubborn to stop. Old Salim speaks to the dust, to a child he still cannot see. He feels the concrete shift. The rescuer next to him says something he doesn't catch. A warning, but the word carries into the hum and ricochet of everything this night has become. Engines, rev, gates, inch, wind cracks, branches, like bones. A generator coughs again and again, each cough shorter than the last. Sit, goes dark. The convoy at the temporary crossing idles, in a line of red taillights that smear like tears across wet asphalt, as the ground shivers under boots and a woman's cry rises sharp and then thin, a sound that could be grief or joy. No one knows yet, and no one can promise which one it will be. By dawn, the quake's calendar has a new word. No planner wants to write. Day 3. The golden hours have dulled to a gray that scratches the throat. The air settles into a smell that will live in clothes no soap can touch. Gypsum, smoke, and the metallic aftertaste of terror. The first UN trucks rumbled into northwest Syria through crossings opened by a deal that felt too slow and also miraculous. Boxers of shelter kits jostle against cooking pots and blankets. The drivers look at the faces along the road and then toward the horizon. Away. Because the faces accuse without trying. Not because aid comes too late, but because no aid is ever enough. Salim squints into a hole. The beam that trapped the boy has shifted. Aja groans, and the concrete rises an inch that feels like a sunrise. A neighbor whispers a prayer and then swallows it, as if to keep it from flying away too soon. Someone calls for silence, and then there is the unmistakable, glorious, ordinary sound of a sneeze. The laugh that erupts is half sob, half song. Hands move, grip hard. The boy comes out in a rush of arms. His cheeks are the dusty crescent moons. He would kiss. If you were his mother, he is not. but she leans forward anyway and kisses air near his hairline. Her hands cling to nothing, to the camera of a volunteer documenting, because in the future someone will ask whether help came and he will need something to answer with. In Sito, there is no future inside the storm, only the now of sheets of water turned to ground. The walls of the clinic sway as if uneasy with their role as walls. A window explodes inward. Glass lies good and glittering around a barefoot child who has learned already not to scream. Nurses use their bodies as shields. A man in a soaked uniform gestures with an authority worn thin by the night. Boats wrench their moorings, bang into one another, and flee inland down streets. A teenage boy pulls an old woman by her sari into a schoolhouse where the chalkboard lists a lesson on fractions that has sudden, aching relevance. Roofs fly. The loudspeaker at the mosque hiccups and returns with a voice that is both human and distant. Stay high. Do not go to the river. If you have rope, tie yourselves to something that will not move. The problem is that nothing will not move. In Yemen, the problem was always movement for a generator blade, a truck, a ceasefire. After the 2022 truce, a quiet settled in some places like tissue paper layer. You could tear with a single angry breath. Flights took off from Sana'a for the first time in years. A few, enough to make a grandmother weep, because the airport staff clapped as if each plane carried a nation. But the truce frayed. The front lines stiffened again. Now floodwater teaches its own map. It chooses the low ground and the forgotten, washing through neighborhoods where rubble from past airstrikes grew weeds, and small children learned to step around shrapnel as if it were furniture. In Marib, a man unzips a tent and watches the sky flashed cold, the canvas roof bead with rain, and the water creep toward the box where he keeps his children's clothes. He lifts the box high, and then looks at his hands, which shake not from fear but from the old weariness of choosing which thing to save. Hospitals in Yemen don't tremble from earthquake, but they tremble because they are used to its foundation eaten by floodwater. Generator, intermittent, staff unpaid for months, but still arriving. In the cholera ward, Haniwachis, the new chlorine stock full. The canisters are heavier than regret, and each pour into the mixing tank is a ritual repeated without ceremony. Unscrew, tilt, cough as the fumes rise. Cap, jot down the number. It is the arithmetic of survival, and like all arithmetic, it is relentless. He scrubs his hands, dries them on his trousers, and wonders how many days until the next truck is turned away at a checkpoint by a man who does not measure time, only power. In Rakhine, the wind doesn't negotiate. It simply finishes what it was built to begin. By midday, silence drops. It is startling, like when a generator finally cuts and the world reveals that it had been screaming for hours. This sigh is a false mercy. Everyone who has ever lived through a cyclone knows what comes next. In the lull, the field coordinator steps outside and finds a city made new by ruin. Boats sit on rooftops, as if they always belonged there. The monastery's bell hangs silent, its rope torn to ribbons. The Rohingya camp has become a pond fenced by bamboo, and the faces that peer over the water are small and hungry for a future, the way one might stare at the surface of the sea and pretend it is glass. In Syria, a crane arrives late. Men who have been digging with their nails step back, eyes wide, as the machine swings its arm into a hole where a family used to make tea. The operator's hands are steady. He remembers when his fingers learned this skill for construction and how, somewhere between then and now, the same gesture became rescue. In the crowd, a woman collapses in relief that a body has been found relief. Because grief has a location now, a shape that can be washed and wrapped. There is a particular quiet that follows the discovery of a person who is no longer here, but is also not lost. It is the quiet of people who have run out of words. Aid maps are not drawn to scale. They give the illusion of reach. They name roads that flag then fade into trees where, in Myanmar, men with guns sit and say no to a truck full of tarps because the driver's list doesn't match the list. They label crossings that in Syria depend on a line drawn in a council chamber far away, then redrawn and drawn again. They mark ports where, in Yemen, a crane lowers a container of therapeutic food onto a dock, watched by men who count the boxers. In the minutes before someone tells them to stop, on Tessie maps, a circle around the warehouse reads prepositioned stocks. like a charm against what is inevitable. But the breaking point is not the map. It is a series of sounds. A grandfather clock in Aleppo that never fell in a decade of war ticks on. In a building now missing its stairs, a child in Sito laughs because he thinks the boat on the neighbor's roof is funny. A mother in Hodeida sings to a baby whose fever breaks and returns. It is a series of faces. A logistics officer recalculating fuel consumption. A monk wringing his robe dry. A man glaring at a checkpoint and then dropping his gaze because he needs to live long enough to try again tomorrow. It is the knowledge that systems built for constancy markets, clinics, schools have been taught the vocabulary of collapse, and they speak it fluently. When the eye wall returns to Rakhine, it opens the door it closed, and the room floods again. The field coordinator grips a post that was not built for this. She counts the seconds between gusts like a sailor. Her phone dies in Syria. Salim sits for the first time in hours and realizes his knuckles are split and swelling, that he has a pebble embedded in his palm, that his shirt has a tear he does not remember making. In Yemen, the water plant's pump shudders and stops. The town's taps cough air. Hani closes his eyes just long enough to see his mother's kitchen, the way steam fogged the window, the way she hummed when she cooked, and he wonders when humming became a luxury. A coordinator in Gaziantep circles a word on the whiteboard again and again until the dry erase marker squeaks. Access. It is a term that tries to be clinical but is not. Looking at it, she realizes she has not written a noun. She has drawn a wound. The wound becomes a negotiation. In New York, microphones amplify statements about humanitarian imperatives, about opening corridors, about sovereignty. In Damascus, a signature appears under a letter consenting to 2 additional crossings for 3 months Bab al-Salam. Aldri names it will become arteries through which a surgically small amount of relief can pulse into a body long deprived. In the northwest, convoys move like cautious animals across bridges that are cracked, but still trying. Drivers learn to read the road by color and shadow, to tell the difference between a fisher that cares and one that is only pretending. In Idlib's outskirts, boys in mismatched shoes point the way with the seriousness of those entrusted with something important because the men who usually direct traffic disappeared into rubble 2 days ago. Rakhine emerges wet and altered. A map on a table blooms with red pins marking damaged clinics and blue for broken boreholes. The pins cluster like flocks. The field coordinator steps into a waiting room filled with silence and wet footprints. An old woman holds a cat wrapped in a child's shirt. A young man shows a phone filled with photos. My home, my mother. Please. The clinic has lost its medicine fridge. The generator failed. Insulin warmed beyond safety during the storm. The nurse looks at the vials and at the woman whose hands shake, and at the same time, she thinks about vaccines that are now just glass and guilt. Roads out are a chessboard, passable only where trees fell with a certain grace, and beyond the roads, administrative permissions sit in a stacked-up paper manifestation of the wind's afterlife. We think of aid as trucks and pallets, but in war, it is also wrists and words. Negotiators sit in plastic chairs, under fans that click like clock hands, explaining that neutrality is not betrayal, that a convoy is not a weapon, and that a tent can be political only to those who have never been cold. Sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes it is not yet. Meanwhile, fishermen in Rakhine angled their boats across a estuary-turned obstacle course. Not 2 fish, but 2 ferry sacks of rice, and jerrycans inland over water still heaving with the storm's memory. Their boats know these routes better than any 4x4 does. In Yemen, the end of a truce did not return the war to its loudest days. Not everywhere. Some front lines hold like unspoken agreements. Through one, fuel ships edge into Hadida, a little more often than last year. The port's cranes swing. Men in the control room watch gauges, like saints watch candles. In Aden, rain shears downhill and flattens markets. Mint sellers tuck their bundles into their chests and run, and the road becomes a river that carries plastic chairs, sandals, a goat that kicks with insulted dignity. In Lodge, flood warnings light up phones that record every message and still drop the ones that matter. The road to a cholera hotspot is blocked by water where there used to be dust. Trucks sit with their noses pointed toward a horizon that has lost interest in letting them through. Honey calls the driver again, and the driver answers with the weary kindness of men who solve things by waiting. Almost, God willing, the checkpoint commander changed shifts. In northwest Syria, cement plants do not ham their roarbat. Today, they are municipal. Their yards turn to distribution points, where tarps and mattresses are stacked as high as a man. People stand in lines that form a geometry the war tried to erase. Order. A woman signs for a kit and looks over her shoulder at a place where she will go to build a tent for her family, next to a tree that is not broken. Aid workers murmured that 90% of search and rescue happened in the first 2 days. Later that the first big UN convoy came on day 5. And no one says the number loud. In a tent, a little girl stares at a cracked doll's face and presses it as if tenderness can glue plastic. In a corner, a man flips through a tattered notebook, listing patients from before the earthquake. Hypertension, diabetes, asthma. He looks up, as if expecting them to walk back with their old complaints, and then forces himself to write new names. Crush injuries. Hypothermia. Infection. Infection. The Sea of Rakhine is a broken mirror. A barge noses into a harbor choked with what used to be houses. Its deck is a square of tarps, sacks, hopes nested in plastic. The captain eyes the sky. Wind still pulls at the clouds like insistence. On shore, volunteers wade waist deep, pass hand over hand, rice sacks bobbing. Each transfer an agreement. On a ridge, someone counts. 20 sacks taken, 4 jerry cans, 1 box of medicines, the weight of which feels more than the cardboard suggests, because each vial inside is a promise with an expiration date. They will have to choose who gets the antibiotic and who will be told instead to drink clean water that is never clean for long. In Yemen, there is a different sort of choosing. A mother decides which child's Fimo bag gets the last sachet of peanut paste. A doctor decides martial law on the ward. Who goes on oxygen? Who breathes the same rooms? If a wash engineer squints into a storm-darted laptop at a spreadsheet that says, there are 4 functioning water points for 10,000 people, and calls his counterpart who says she will send a team if the bridge stands. They both know that is not the condition that will matter. Across all 3 places, risk is a currency that cannot be printed. Aid workers calibrated hourly. Is this road mined? Is that warehouse on a list? Did the deconfliction message reach the brigade commander whose phone has been off since morning? They check their cars for trackers. They cover logos when the sun shifts and the shadow of a stencil might offend someone. They carry blood types on cards, taped inside their passports. They text one another when they get home because normal friends cannot fully understand the relief in hearing 3 words. Home. Safe. Today, the wind does not return to Sito. Not like that, but the tide does. Floodwater recedes, leaves behind a science of filth. Latrines have floated off to become the river's problem. Wells, tice of sea. The nurse stands on the clinic's step and watches a line form along rope she hung between 2 posts. A make-do cordon, a semblance of the order she was taught to create a nursing school before order became a luxury. She looks past the crowd at a neighborhood that is now wood, tin, and sky, and she feels her own body as a small, temporarily reliable system that will need sleep soon. At a crumpled bridge in Idlib, a convoy sits. The driver of the lead truck stands on the buckled asphalt and holds his radio in one hand and a cigarette in the other, as if one might light the other. The river below is a jagged Nuthina, channel cut by the quake. Behind them, aftershocks ripple through the hills. Ahead, a road across a valley promises speed. A crane inches into place, and the driver imagines his cargo falling, the tarp unrolling, tents into water floating like jellyfish. He does not say this to the woman on the radio who is somewhere back in Gaziantep, drawing lines on a map with her finger and mumbling to herself the names of towns she has never seen but memorized by where their names sit on a page. Then the barge nose dips. A wave rolls the deck. A stack of tarps leans. A young volunteer reaches instinctively and almost goes over with them. Hands grab his belt. He laughs, a burst of disbelief hanging between water and wood, between being part of the aid and being carried away by it. He coughs, spits, and smiles at the absurdity of balance, while, in Yemen, the water plants, auxiliary generator hiccups, coughs, catches, and runs thinly, but runs. The engineer shrugs, half in thanks, half in superstition, and looks at the road cam again, where floodwater still licks the bridge like a patient animal, waiting. The bridge in Idlib holds. The crane swings, eases a plate of steel into place with the delicacy of a hand laying a blanket over a sleeping child. Men guided with ropes, step in light, eyes fast on the edges. The lead driver inches forward, wheels finding purchase in the uncanny sound of steel on stone. On the other side, he looks in the rear view and sees trucks coming, line after line, as if once a path exists, courage can multiply. There is no cheering. The radios crackle with coordinates. With the domestic vocabulary of disasters, turn left at the olive grove, the road with the donkey cart, the house with the blue door that isn't blue anymore. Tarps become roofs. Stoves light. A clinic receives boxers of gauze and ketamine, and a vacuum extractor for deliveries. Because life insists even where concrete fell. A baby is born by headlamp. The midwife wraps a ribbon around the girl's wrist, made of the elastic from a surgical mask, because there are no ribbons left that haven't been used to tie something shut. In Rakhine, the barge kisses the harbor wall hard, and then holds, rubbing in little circles as men with tired eyes heave its cargo into a city that now smells like salt, mud, and cooked rice. The temple yard becomes a distribution point. Monks and women in borrowed veils mark off squares with chalk where families will step and wait. The loudspeaker crackles to announce that names called will receive a sack. Those not called today will come tomorrow. Tomorrow is a fiction everyone participates in to keep the line from becoming a circle. The field coordinator raises a megaphone and repeats instructions that have to do with fairness and safety and the physics of crowd. And she remembers how, in training, someone once drew a triangle to represent needs: water, shelter, medicine, and, though the triangle is useful, it has no space for the thing she is doing right now. Making eye contact with a father holding a child and telling him with her eyes, "I see you." In Yemen, the convoy carrying chlorine and oars reaches the checkpoint. A negotiation as old as war, as boring as bureaucracy, and as time-sensitive as a beating heart. The papers don't match. The stamp is wrong color. The man in the chair puts up a hand that has stopped trucks like this for years. Hani calls again. The driver does not answer. The engineer at the plant watches the reservoir level drop like a curtain and calculates when the taps in the far neighborhood will stop speaking. A phone rings. The checkpoint commander's superior, the one who 2 months ago agreed to a local deconfliction arrangement, answers and says quietly, "Let them pass." He could be speaking about water or mercy. The barrier rises. The truck grinds forward. Ingin Dias, a bulldozer, lifts what remains of an apartment building. The operator now knows exactly how a roof wants to fall, which way a staircase will slide. He speaks to the machine as if it understands and feels some relief when it quirks in the way he expected. Order returning. Not peace, but a routine after disaster. Salim walks the street and smells coffee. Someone has set up a kettle on a camp stove and is pouring into paper cups. He takes one. The heat against his aching hands a small generosity, and the coffee tastes exactly like it always did before the earthquake. Even if nothing else does. A woman asks if he has seen her brother. He has not. He writes the name down because writing is a way of saying that the missing are real. Deliveries in Rakhine go to places lists cannot see. After hours of post-storm tide, the Rohingya camp is a map made of wet paths and torn plastic. A team carries boxers balanced on heads and hip bones, skirting pits where latrines used to be, stepping over the outlines of rooms that families marked with chalk to rebuild walls when walls are allowed. A boy named Karimno, older than the disaster he was born into, holds a flashlight high for the nurse as she cleans a wound that should have been a child's scraped knee, but is instead the kind of infection that comes from floodwater in history. The nurse hums without realizing, a tune from somewhere else, a protest against the smell. She bandages. She smiles. She moves on. In Yemen's cholera ward, a new canister of chlorine bubbles, like relief. The nurse starts the drip for the little girl whose mother had stopped asking questions 3 hours ago. She sees the slow return of color to a child's lip and calls Hanny to watch because victories are communal or they feel like lies. He leans in, exhales, and his shoulders drop for the first time in days. He thinks of the rows of canisters at the water plant and the rows of people outside. And for a minute, the math lines up just enough to hold their hearts together. The cross-border aid routes into northwest Syria will not stay open forever. The letter on the desk has an end date, but today, trucks moved. Today, in a village outside Afrin, a woman whose home is now a screen of plastic stretched over a wooden frame cuts bread into triangles and dips them into oil from a bottle with a flower painted on it. She shares with the neighbor family because someone once shared with her. A boy in a red sweater pushes a toy taxi that someone found under rubble and washed. Its wheel sticks. He pulls it free and continues, negotiating a small broken world as if it were a city with traffic rules and predictable lights. Rakhine at dusk is purple, then gray. Men gather to talk about fixing wells. Women slice bamboo into strips. Children chase chickens in puddles. The sky opens in spots and shows stars. The field coordinator sits on a step with a notepad full of lists and a head full of numeric anguish beneficiary counts. Tonnage balances, contingency stocks end for the first time since the wind began. She allows herself to think about the question people who love her ask. Why? She has no answer clean enough. A monk offers her tea. She accepts. They drink together in the kind of silence that is, finally, not fear. Yemen's night returns with the whir of pumps and the chatter of radios that sound, strangely, like normal. There are still checks ahead, and storms have been arriving with a new hunger on the Arabian Sea. Cyclone names that used to be exotic are now familiar. The engineer turns off a light and looks at the city. Somewhere not far, a pot of milk boils for tea, the surface puffing like a small, surprised chest. Hani texts his mother, finished late. Okay. He adds a heart he would never say in person. The aftermath in these three places will not resolve neatly. Sanctions carve narrow paths where suppliers can stand. Currencies slide. Politics draft new restrictions and rooms where no one we've met tonight will ever sit. Aid workers leave sometimes because their contracts end or their spirits do. Local volunteers do not leave because there is nowhere to go. And besides, leaving would be a betrayal of the roads their feet already know. And yet, there is something like resolution in small acts repeated. Water chlorinated. Tarp tied. Baby warmed. It is not the resolution of a story. It is the resolution of a photograph brought into focus by hours in a dark room. The image of a community not as victim or hero, but as people who woke up and did the day while the world felt far and later. In the films that play in our heads, disaster is a wave that breaks, and then the sea is flat. Here, the sea remembers. Here, the ground keeps shifting, because men make it shift and because plates move under our cities without regard to ceasefires. The lesson is unglamorous and relentless. The interest we pay on inaction compounds. Preposition stocks, inland, fund local first responders like you would fund the future because they are open crossings before the buildings fall. Negotiate deconfliction that covers not just roads, but the slow arteries of civil life. Listen to those who speak quietly from places where loud voices have always had the microphone. Under the broken arch of a doorway in Jindirs, Salim looks up at a sky that looks exactly like the sky before any of this started, and he knows that is both comforting and intolerable. In Rakhine, the nurse wraps a bandage with hands that are finally steady. In Yemen, Hani steps into a puddle and splashes himself and laughs, because for one moment, he's just a man who got his trousers wet. Across these places, the work continues into hours that have no name, and the world's attention moves as it moves. But some things stay. The quickening when a generator catches, the uncoiling of a fist when a child breathes, the handshake. That means tomorrow, again. If stories like this move you, subscribe for more true events that change the world.